I want to talk about imposter syndrome. This is the second video on this channel, and I've already got voices telling me that I can't do this. Finding every kind of reason why this isn't going to work, and to deter me from, God forbid, ever creating these videos. So, how have I dealt with these? I simply haven't really been paying them too much attention because I just see them for what they are. I don't really let them drag me under the surface. But more importantly, I don't identify with them. In the words of Eckhart Tolle, identifying is when you let something that your mind does, a certain thought, define who you are. It's like you take it and bring it super close to you, so these thoughts are defining you and you see yourself in them. But I simply don't anymore. I don't let much of what my mind does define me, and I think that's part of true progress within oneself. Especially in earlier ages, it seems that everything that goes past in your mind is so freaking important. But it turns out, at least for me, as you get older, you start to see the futility of these thoughts, and you start to question where they even came from and why they seem so absolute and so valid, when in reality they're not. They're not valid thoughts. They're built on shreds of rational reasoning, possibly from a long time ago, if that even makes sense. But it's like we need to update our own software because our software is outdated. And these are the exact type of things that are going to continue unless we step in. Imposter syndrome especially is at its worst when we don't question it. We fully submit to it. And if we do submit to it, we may have to look deeper and ask why that's happening in the first place. There may be false beliefs you've had about yourself, beliefs that were passed on to you by people around you when you were younger, or simply the way that you thought about the world or made sense of it, that have created a kind of core belief in you where imposter syndrome is able to thrive. It's like in certain conditions, bacteria, for example, can thrive the best. And I draw parallels to that because imposter syndrome works at its best when we agree with what it's saying. Sometimes you need to travel through multiple layers and rationalize your way back to what makes sense, because as we go through life, we accumulate experiences and we start to understand the world better and ourselves better. But at the same time, we create these conclusions that were built on pockets of life experience, and I suppose the mind went and made those beliefs concrete based on those experiences. But the mind is not conclusive. It's not absolute. It's not often correct. I hate to say it, but in so many instances, it's not correct because it's built on associations. And if these associations, by default, are created in spaces that we don't simply know any better because we haven't had enough life experiences, this is primarily when we're younger, then it's almost like we can lose a little bit of trust in what we believe. So when you're starting something completely new out, starting to talk to a camera, starting to voice your opinions, it's totally normal to start feeling that kind of imposter syndrome. It's just how you decide to react to it internally, which is the whole game, right? And I truly sympathize with those that are pulled under by it, because I was too. It took a lot of conscious effort on my part to prove to myself that these thoughts weren't right. And I think this is similar to what they do in cognitive behavioral therapy when they're working at the level of thoughts to gather evidence as to why our brain's conclusions aren't always correct. And it's almost like a game in itself over time, just to notice the futility of the mind and to prove to yourself, not just from what I'm saying, but just watch in your own head how much of it isn't true and how much of it is just these wild accusations that you wonder where they even came from, you know? So when I'm sitting here about to film this video and I hear my mind saying, you know, you're going to fail, or you're not going to be good enough for this, you're not going to help people, it's like I can't take it seriously at all. I'm not going to ridicule it. I'm not going to give it a whole bunch of resistance. I'm simply going to just notice the fact that it's not true and I don't believe it, based on my experience of seeing the mind's futility, I'm not going to fall for the trap. And like, that's like an automatic thought that I have when those thoughts come past. And it's like, that is another way to pull yourself out of identifying with thoughts that don't define us. So it's really a long-term thing to address this problem of identifying with what the mind's throwing at us. Meditative techniques will really focus on letting the thoughts come and go, but I did that before I started rationalizing with the mind a little bit more. And just the awareness of letting thoughts come and go wasn't enough for me. It's like I had to have solid, concrete reasons as to why the mind was wrong. And that's only when I started having the most progress in this area of not being pulled under anymore. So for some people, the meditative route might be fine. It's just in my case personally that I just needed something a little bit extra. And the absolute worst thing I could have done is to just ruminate on that thought and go, maybe it's right, maybe it's right. And then I'll be sitting there not making this video questioning whether to do it or not. And I know for a fact that I can, and I truly do believe in myself with this stuff. And it's like a strange kind of cognitive dissonance where you got two entities kind of fighting each other, you know, which one's right, and luckily that's up to you. And I don't really see my mind fighting back when I give it that rationalization that it's just not right. Because I know certainly that it's like the mind can start fighting back if you start challenging it. It can start pushing even harder to drive its agenda. But with this in particular, it's absolutely fine. I think, again, it's just another way of taking agency within yourself. It's a way to become an active player. It's a way to become a leader in yourself. And a lot of these videos, I think, are going to be talking about that, because that's so central to this kind of self-improvement work that's very driven around how to have a mind and not let it take you over, and to have, I'm hesitant to say control, but more of an agency and a leadership role that you're developing within the mind itself. This is also just speculation, but I wonder if the more that you do this work and the more you kind of disprove it and step up to question whether it's right, and over time kind of submitting to that and letting you take the wheel more, I wonder if it starts to just back off more in general, and things like imposter syndrome just become less of an issue, because they become more like little drops in the water rather than a fire hydrant going off in the street. It's like over time it becomes quieter and a bit more submissive. And you didn't bully it into doing that. You just give it more reasons over time that oppose a lot of the things that it's worried about. When you experience a thought, it's like it appears just so real and so conclusive, and it's like we have to bow down to it because it comes in with such force. And it doesn't matter if they come in with force, because if you know that your rationalization is correct, no matter how it felt with those thoughts coming in, I think you're going to prevail. And I'm proof of that, because I made this video even after having those exact thoughts right beforehand. And it's not to say that they didn't come in with force. They're just, it's like they're easier to deal with now. I can simply just move on, like, as soon as I see them. So yeah, using rationalizations to take a more active position is the way.